When I was just a young boy, I think I was about 9, 10 years old, and this would have been in the mid-60s, I saw my mother writing on a piece of paper on the dining room table when she had a free moment of time. And when I asked her what she was doing, she said she was writing her life story. And after finding out what she was doing, I never paid much attention to it and saw her doing that occasionally from time to time. But apparently, she kept that up until about 1985 or a little later than that, something like that. And she ended up with about 700 or so pages of handwritten manuscript on standard 8.5 by 11-inch paper. And on her deathbed, when she was dying, or sometime close to that, she gave that stack of papers to me and told me I needed to do something with them so that the family had them, because it was family history. And so I've had them in my possession for quite a while. And just recently I decided now was the time to do something with them. And so I have published them. At first, when I decided to take care of this project, to try to publish these, I thought, because it was handwritten, I thought, well, I should try to transcribe these, type them up, make it look like a book and so forth. But, my mother, some of you relatives of ours remember hearing her talk and hearing her speak, and she had her own little dialect and her own way of writing things. And so looking at it, I thought, well, that would sure lose a lot in the translation if I tried to transcribe it, because it's much better looking at it. This was her own handwriting. She wrote this down as she saw it, and she also wrote it down, with her own dialect, so to speak. There are misspelled words because she spelled some words that were the way they sounded. And remember, English was not her first language, although she was very fluent at English. There was still some idiosyncrasies of how she wrote things. So I left all those in there. And what I've done is taken these pages and photocopied them, scanned them, and put them into a book that's 8.5 by 11, so it's true size to what she wrote it as, and made 7 volumes of these. Any of you who want to know a little bit about the history of the family and how they immigrated over here from Holland after World War II in the late 40s, and all of the things that happened prior to that, including the Nazi occupation and a lot of history before that. My mother wrote that all down, and the way she knew a lot of the things that happened before she was born, and a lot of detail, was that her grandmother, whom she was named after, told her and would sit her down sometimes and tell her these stories that she knew. So my mother wrote them down firsthand, well, secondhand actually, because her grandmother was telling her about her life and the things she knew about the family back then. And this would have been in the early 1900s, late 1800s, and there's even a little bit of history that goes back to the 1870s, something like that. So this is a history of the family as my mother knew it, and before she was born, of how she was told about the history by her grandmother. And this is all written from her point of view. It's available at a company called Lulu.com. And what that is a print-on-demand house. In other words, somebody sends an order in for a book, they print the one book and send it out. Technology today allows them to do that. Now these books cost roughly $5 a piece, and there's 7 volumes. Now you got to add postage to that, so they're not really expensive. And just as a disclaimer, this is on my page. I have other books that I published and put out on there, and that I try to sell to make a little money. Now these, I've priced them so that I'm not making any money on these, and I shouldn't make money. I think my mother would haunt me if I try to make some money off of these. So whatever you see, $4.70, that kind of a price, and that is the printing cost. So, in other words, that's the cost I would pay if I had to buy them at my cut rate price. So you can get them at that price plus the postage, and you can buy them one at a time, or you can buy the whole set if you want. Now, I'll provide a link in the narrative below that'll take you right to my page on lulu.com, and it should, if it works correctly, and I think it does, I've tested it, it should just bring up only these 7 books and not the rest of the ones that I have on that site. That's how you get them if you want them. It's pretty cheap. They're 8.5 by 11, like I say, and there's a lot of very, very interesting history in there. And for those of you who are not members of the family, if you just want to know some history of what happened over in Holland and the Nazi occupation and World War II and the liberation and all that stuff, there's a lot of it in there, and how people had to live their daily activities. See, my mother was talking in this book about the daily things she had to do to survive during those times, and as a matter of fact, before those times and after those times. So if you want to know a little bit of history of someone who went through it, it might be quite interesting.